You're listening to the Power of Payments podcast with your host, Will Hernandez.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode number 10 of the Power of Payments podcast. I am your host, Will Hernandez, as the intro music said. If you'll notice this week, no crazy intro music, and I think I'm going to keep it that way until I actually have custom-made music. I told you guys a few weeks ago that that was something I wanted to work on, and hopefully that's going to be happening fairly soon. There are a lot of things that I've already talked about that I want to do that I haven't done yet for the podcast, and the music is one of them. So hopefully somewhere down the road here that I'm going to have that custom music as I am back with you after 2 to 3 weeks off. And yeah, life gets busy, and I think I knew that was going to be an issue coming back here to New York and living back here in New York for a little bit. Things are going to get hectic in that matter. But anyway, I do have a guest this week, and his name is Bryan Lewis. He is the president and CEO at Intellicheck. And Bryan and I get into a conversation about kind of what's going on right now with fraud and payments fraud and with authentication. And that's what Intellicheck does. They authenticate government IDs to help FIs and retailers prevent fraud, at really the beginning of the whole payments process. So again, it was a good conversation that him and I had, and it was kind of funny because earlier in the day, right before I had jumped on to the call with Bryan, looking at a article that the New York Times had written about Zelle and the kind of fraud issues that are happening there. I'm not going to get into that right now in the intro, but if you stick around, I do have some thoughts on that, on the Times article, on what they wrote about with Zelle. And it goes back to something that I wrote about actually a couple of months back when this whole issue of supposed fraud started happening on Zelle. So if you want to stick around, this is going to be a new thing I try to do with segment number 3 on the podcast, is to try to get into an issue a little bit more in depth, something that's been bothering me in the payments industry or banking industry or something related. So I'll get into that in segment number 3 after my talk with Bryan. So stick around, and after the break, I'll have my interview with Bryan Lewis. Thanks. Hey, and welcome back, everyone. I am here with my guest on this episode, and that is Bryan Lewis. He is the president and CEO at Intellicheck. And Bryan, thanks for taking a call this week with me. I really appreciate that.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile before I came on here to record, and was looking at your background, and you seem to have taken a kind of curious, maybe interesting kind of path to Intellicheck. So give me an idea about the path that you've taken and why you're at Intellicheck now.
Sure. So if you look at it, it does seem a little bit interesting. I've had quite the career in finance, and I'd say specifically in financial technology,
Sure.
Mostly around transactions in that world. Trading systems, risk management systems, the world of how do we make sure a trade goes off the way that it should.
Right.
So I really have this main interest in financial technology, finance, and payments and other things. And when I stumbled across Intellicheck through a headhunter, it looked to me like it was the best of both worlds.
Okay.
So I get to work at a company that's gaining, real attention for its cutting-edge products at a time when I think that that technology is really important in the payments industry. Because I look at, whether you're looking at mobile, online, point-of-sale payments from, every possible angle in the retail world, plus what we can do in other industries like restaurants and bars and financial institutions.
Sure.
Authentication seemed to me to be the first step in combating fraud, and in some cases, preventing enforcement penalties. So to me, it was quite the opportunity. So I looked at the company and was completely taken aback by what some of the clients of the company were saying about the products that they're using, like our Retail ID suite.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear somebody say something like, "This is a game changer," that's very impressive.
Sure, right.
And then my next step was to look at the people who work here, and I saw a team of amazing innovators. So to me, it just seemed like right place, right time. I'm joining a company that I believe has a really great future.
Now, did you know much about the payments industry beforehand? Because I noticed you've only been at Intellicheck for only 3 months. So what was kind of your experience coming in with the payments industry in general?
I'd say in general, it had more to do with the settlements industry.
Okay.
How do you settle a trade? So, the same type of thing. There's been evolutions in that, going from trade to 5 days down to 3 days, down to 2 days, 1 day. And, they're looking to look at instantaneous settlement on that stuff. So I saw a lot of similarities between that world and the world of payments.
Is there anything in particular that you find attractive about the payments industry in general?
Well, given the fact that it is evolving so rapidly, I thought it was, a really fun place to be involved in. Mm-hmm. I remember, for me in ATM, my first job, I remember going over and dropping the payment or the envelope full of all the cash that the company had generated that day in a drop box.
Sure.
And then, it turned into the teller machine that you could walk up to, and everybody said, that's never going to work. People, they want to go inside. They want to talk to a teller.
Do. Yeah.
Right. And now it's what we do 24/7. I couldn't imagine living without an ATM. And that's even now evolving so that you can take a picture and deposit your checks. Mm-hmm. So from everything that you see, we could say the same thing about the checking industry, debit versus credit cards, prepaid cards. The whole industry is moving at lightning speed. And I think brick and mortar, that's always going to be there, but there are so many iterations of how payments can be made and through, many different channels. I think it just is a fascinating place to be right now.
You mentioned it a little bit in the beginning here as far as what Intellicheck does with authenticating government IDs and how that links to the payments industry. Talk about that a little bit more, as that being the first step, you think, for authentication and protecting against fraud.
Yeah, when you think about the heart of every transaction, I think there are two critical pieces, to that. One is legitimizing the transaction and potentially the person on the other side of it. And I think the easiest way to do that is to authenticate an ID. And the second thing you need to do is do that with speed and accuracy. Mm-hmm. And at its heart, that is what we do at Intellicheck. It's accurate, instant authentication in a frictionless manner that enhances the customer experience. And I think that has, it's a simple statement, but very significant implications. And if, we looked at a few of our clients, and we just took 4 of our retailers, our department store clients, and we looked at data from October 17 through April of this year. So, we hit the height of, the holiday season when they're doing a lot of their business. Mm-hmm. And we looked at, those transactions where somebody was looking to open a credit account, or they were doing a card not present transaction. And we found that 0.299% of the time, it's very precise, but that was what the number was, we found that the ID presented was fake. Now, that might sound like a small number, but if you consider the scale, in a 6-month period, that was about 35,000 transactions at just those 4 department stores, those chains. And what we've also done is we've asked our clients, by the industry that they're in, department stores, jewelers, that sort of thing. And the average that the department stores came back to us and said a fraudulent transaction cost them about $2,100 each and every time. So when you look at the amount that it happens and the cost of each transaction, we were talking about $12 million a month for those 4 chains alone. Mm-hmm. So it is, it's a significant amount out there, and stopped with authentication. And then the Wall Street Journal did an interesting article in March of this year about a guy named Kevin Lyle down in Atlanta, I think the DOJ made kind of a case about him because he was able just to, out of thin air, synthetically create 300 people.
Wow.
Synthetic identity fraud. And with those 300 people and all the credit accounts that he was able to open up, he scammed about $350,000 out of retailers and credit card companies. And I would say that, again, authentication would have stopped that before it happened, because
Sure.
you can create a synthetic identity, but you can't create a synthetic government ID that's going to pass what we can do.
Mm-hmm. Just in terms of trying to stay ahead of the fraudsters out there, isn't that always the question that comes up? I mean, how do you do that? How does Intellicheck do that?
Yeah, and look, it's an arms race. There's no doubt about it. As we get better, they get better. So there's a lot of things. We've got years of history on exactly what a barcode is supposed to be like on the back of an ID. And we do all of Canada, all U.S. government, military IDs and state driver's license and state IDs. And it is a matter of just constantly studying. And when we find that somebody has created a fraud, that we didn't catch right away, it gets to us, we analyze it, and we figure it out, and it goes into our database. So that database of knowing everything that is right, and then again, some of our patented technology, that's what allows us to do it. But it is, as I said, an arms race. They get a little bit better, we got to get better as well, and that's what we do.
Obviously, they're getting better or staying consistent because we can talk about data breaches now. I mean, they are continuing to be in the news, whether something recent like a Panera, and even really going all the way back to a TJX type of thing. And I think with Target, it was funny because I felt as though Target was the first one that was really in the news, because it was something, a retailer that was so popular, and a lot of people went to it, and there was a lot of news coverage around that specific data breach. And I guess the question would be, somebody who's in the industry now and taking a look back and seeing, why does this keep happening? Maybe it's a simple question to ask, but why does it keep happening? And the other thing too is, it seems, and I don't know if you read about the Panera case, but it seemed like in some cases, some of these companies are a bit like flippant attitude about it. Well, what happened, and life goes on, and whatever. But so look at those two questions as they relate there to data breaches.
It's funny. They would probably disagree with the word flippant, but I can understand how people would come across and feel that way.
Sure, right.
Because I'm sure that they think that they've got the right protections in place.
Sure, right.
And they're all working hard to address the problem. But here again is another arms race, and technology is a double-edged sword. And right now, with unlimited global communication and everybody being connected, it brings the targets that fraudsters can go to at a global level, because they can get into and look to hack just about anybody. And I can tell you this, I'm a victim of all those places. I shop at Target, and Best Buy, I'm part of, the Experian breach. I'm out there. I know my data's out there.
Sure. Which
is one of the things I think makes authentication even more important, because the old trusted standby, how would somebody figure out who I am? They'd ask me for where I live, my address. They'd ask me for my social security number. They'd ask me for maybe some ID, which they might scan but not authenticate. They might ask for, a mobile phone account just to see what's going on. But, each one of those pieces of information is now sort of suspect, because there's plenty of free databases out there where I can find, just by putting in a name and a state, somebody's address.
Sure.
And a great research report put out by Javelin in February of this year said that for the first time, social security numbers have outpaced credit card numbers as the most breached form of PII. So when you think about everything that's out there, and you go back to the case of Kevin Lyle in Atlanta, who, knowing the system and how to know that you're going to get denied credit, but it starts to build a credit history, was able to use invalid or illegally obtained information to validate other invalid information. So you're sort of validating with wrong info.
Sure.
And, that's the problem that we're facing, I think, because of all these breaches, which is why I think somebody with a robust authentication process could stop this in its tracks.
That's scary when you think about that.
Yeah, right. And when you think about it, flippancy is definitely a luxury no business can afford, because the amount of the fraud out there created by all of this, people put it, $16-17 billion a year. That's certainly nothing to sneeze at, let alone the loss of, consumer trust, which
Sure.
has a direct effect on people's shopping and transactional habits. It adds up.
Do you cringe at all now when you look at, and you kind of mentioned it before, about how we're so connected, we're more connected now than we've ever been before, and I know there are crazy kind of numbers about the number of connected devices that are coming down the line. What do you make of the whole kind of IoT and kind of the security behind that right now?
Yeah. One day when your refrigerator can spy on you, right? That's going to be a very
Right.
interesting world.
Exactly.
And, it all connects. And I think, there are people beginning to look at that. But it can become, very much, an Orwellian Brave New World where, everything is available, which then, knowing that it's an arms race to keep databases safe, it really does. I just think that this problem that we're talking about of fraud and authentication is only going to increase.
So with that being said, then, from your perspective, from Intellicheck's perspective, what more can the industry do, whether it's a financial institution or a retailer or whatever, to protect that sensitive data, particularly the payments data that's out there?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the original premise, and certainly one of the reasons that I joined this company, that I think a robust authentication scheme is one of the first steps in the whole process. Because the data, it's out there right now to go
Sure.
in and really get a lot of us on fraud. Right? It hit a record number of people last year. Accenture put out a report where they were talking about the life cycle of fraud and what it takes from a breach to when things really start to pick up in terms of that data being used in appropriate ways. It's about a year. So if you think about everything that happened last year, with the amount of breaches that we had, which should be now, it's been about a year. People start to pay less attention to it. The fact that the credit agency was going to pay for 1 year's worth of protection, that's
Right.
going to expire.
Right.
And I think things are going to pick up again. And many of the things that we look at, again, you want to pick, validate me through my mobile phone. Well, 25% of the new fraud in the world last year was people getting mobile phones that shouldn't have been in their names.
Right.
So you're validating on invalid data. So I think that the authentication becomes really important. And I also think what, as an industry, we need to do is not fall prey to the shiny new toy. That there is a silver bullet out there, and now it's going to be, this new technology, or behavioral studies on how you hit the keyboard, or things like that.
Sure, right.
There might be a time for that, but right now we know there's something you can put in place that is going to stop a lot of it. Our clients tell us that we're like 99.99% accurate in figuring this out. So that authentication step one says, hey, don't do this, or at least look at this with a lot more scrutiny before you go on with whatever that transaction it is. So I think it's always important to be evolving and looking what's coming down the future, but don't ignore what works today.
Right, exactly. Do you worry at all? And this is something that tends to come up sometimes at industry conferences when you talk about, okay, this is what the industry is doing. They seem to be self-regulating as much as possible to prevent these problems. But then somebody will say, well, what can the government do? You know, is government interference necessary? And then you watch something like the Facebook thing, and you're like, these guys don't even know maybe how the internet works, you know?
Yeah.
So, what do you,
Yeah.
that was really scary.
You
So
watch
what do
right.
you, what do you,
You watch that
exactly.
whole thing, and you're like, wow, these guys are making the laws about this, and I don't even know if some of them know how to log on to a computer.
Sure.
It's unfortunate, but it really is the fact that I don't know the government can regulate it the right way. But I do know that there's a lot of smart people out there who are coming up with great solutions to a lot of problems. And I also know that there's a lot of equally smart people out there who are trying to figure out how to make a buck in a way that they shouldn't, and how do I defeat those smart solutions.
Sure.
So I believe that the more you can keep it open to smart people figuring it out, the better off we'll be. Regulation often has a lot of unintended consequences
Sure.
to
Oh, yeah.
the problem they're trying to solve.
That is for sure. Bryan, one last question here before I let you go.
Yeah.
Some trends maybe to keep an eye on going forward, whether it is an authentication or anything else. I know obviously there's talk about encryption. We all know that tokenization. There's more biometrics being used nowadays with smartphones having a fingerprint ID and eye scanning and stuff like that. But what else? What else should we be keeping an eye on right now?
I think it's going to be very interesting in the next couple of years, and I think there's two things certainly to watch out there. One, I would say, is technology based, and the other is just new ways to, I think, create fraud. So the first thing I'd say to watch is biometrics. Right.
Okay.
So, at Intellicheck, we've got, a very strong biometric patent portfolio, so we believe in it. But because of that, we're also very well aware of some of the issues.
Sure.
You read all the time how somebody's been able to come up with a way to spoof facial recognition, or how do you make sure that there's liveliness in the photo and you're not just taking photos of photos, fingerprints, other things like that. And I think one of the big issues with that right now, and I'll go back to Orwell, is it's a big data privacy issue to a lot of people. How is this data going to be used? Where is it stored? Who protects it? Who gets access? I think there are many questions out there that still need to be answered before a lot of people are comfortable with it. And then I think the second thing is people are realizing the holes in the system is this synthetic identity fraud. Accenture put a report out in January that said that they believe in 2018 alone, synthetic identity fraud could cost them billions of dollars, and they couldn't even begin to put a number on how many hours it would take them to even find the problem and solve them. And you have the Department of Justice, who said that synthetic identity fraud has become one of the fastest growing consumer fraud schemes in the U.S.
Jeez.
I think that's going to continue, and it's something that we're all going to have to be cognizant of. So I think those are two trends I think will be very, very important to watch.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Bryan, this was a very interesting conversation, and I definitely learned some things here. I want to thank you for coming on this episode, and I am sure that we will talk down the line sometime.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a lot, Bryan. Take care.